Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I wanted to make a video that I think I am going to title In Defense for Epigraphs in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or maybe it's sort of just my understanding of them and a discussion about them in general and their use in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and maybe as fantasy, the genre as a whole. But the reason I said in defense is because I've noticed that some people online have stated as they're making their way through these books that it's definitely the minority of people, I'd imagine, but some people have mentioned that they don't particularly enjoy the epigraphs. They don't always read them. Sometimes they skip straight past them and they don't understand them. They don't think they add anything to the text, or they just don't see the purpose in reading them in general, or they don't like them. And well, that's perfectly all right. Everybody has their own preferences and tastes. I don't think that you're getting as much out of the Malazan Book of the Fallen text as you can if you read the epigraphs, be them short, be they long. I know some of them last 2 pages sometimes, maybe more. I'm not done the series yet, but um, I just wanted to talk about it because I've seen people make these complaints, and I always found it odd because I've always enjoyed the epigraphs. I never skip them. I think that skipping the epigraphs is tantamount to just skipping chapters or pages. I mean, you wouldn't skip a vignette just because a character that you don't like is in it. And just as I wouldn't skip the epigraphs. And while it's perfectly reasonable, I believe that anybody can, read the book in whatever way they see most fit, I wanted to make a case for why I think the epigraphs are worth reading, why they're so good. Most of the place that I've seen, or most of these comments that I've seen, have appeared on the Malazan subreddit, and it's not often, and it's definitely the minority of people. But maybe somebody will see this video that doesn't enjoy the epigraphs, and this could change your view on how you read them or whether you want to read them or not. And if you do like the epigraphs, maybe you'll just enjoy my thoughts. I just wanted to share them regardless. So with that, what I did is I took 3 books that I remember having particular epigraphs that I enjoyed, and I marked them with bookmarks. You can't see it because that light's super thick, but I'm just going to use these as some examples in any random order that I choose. But I just felt like these epigraphs in particular can highlight some of the reasons that the epigraphs are worth reading and why they're so good, and I want to use them as examples. And especially since the epigraphs that appear in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, their purposes are wide and varied, from being basically telling you what's going to happen in a chapter to foreshadowing what's going to happen later in the book and during that chapter, to encapsulating maybe some of the themes and the lessons uh, that appear in that chapter or in that book. And so I chose, I think, 4 random ones from House of Chains, Midnight Tides, and the Bone Hunters. If you've seen any of my other videos, I've already made a video about one of these epigraphs, and I was really debating adding the epigraph of chapter 15 of Reaper's Gale, because that is one of the best poems that I think has been written in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's called The Coming Storm by Refer, but I have a 40-something minute video about that, so I figured I've already talked about that enough, so I figured I'd use these. But without further ado, I will talk about, this is going to be spoilers up until the Bone Hunters, as far as the epigraphs go, but I'm probably going to talk about stuff all the way till Reaper's Gale. Probably not anything in Toll the Hounds, but so beware for spoilers up until that point. Maybe I won't mention anything in Reaper's Gale, but I'll add a discretionary thing at the beginning of the video if I don't, to let you know what point you're at, if you can watch this video or not without getting spoiled. But One of the first examples that I picked was in The Bone Hunters, and that's the epigraph of chapter 4. And I'll read it really quickly, just in case, you don't know. All that Karul created, you understand, was born of the Elder God's love of possibility. Myriad paths of sorcery spun out a multitude of strands, each wild as hairs in the wind, hackled to the wandering beast. And Karul was that beast, yet he himself was a parody of life, for blood was his nectar, the spilled gift, red tears of pain, and all that he was defined by that singular thirst. For all that, thirst is something we all share. Yes? Brutho and Nullet speak on Nullet's Last Night by Brutho Parlet. One thing that I will add that I think is important for a lot of these epigraphs is who is saying them. We don't know who Brutho and Nullet are, which makes it all the stranger that it's on Nullet's last life. Now, based off of what these people are talking about, I would imagine has some very mystical, arcane knowledge to do with it because they're talking about Karul and his creation of the Warrens. And that's sort of the first point that I want to talk about. One of the best parts, and when I first started reading fantasy, this is what I thought epigraphs were always meant for, and that is world building. They are just world building. There's just extra stuff that you can add at the beginning of chapter. It doesn't even need to relate to the chapter. That just adds information. I remember for the longer back when I read the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, that's what I assumed they always were, and I didn't look for any connection with the chapters. Um, while I don't believe that is true for that specific epigraph, I chose that one because I wanted to highlight it because it does talk about lore. While we already knew that Karul created the Warrens and that they were his blood in a sense, I feel that reinforcement was very interesting in that sort of aspect of the series, as well as what he talks about. He says that his medium is blood and that he has a thirst, and that thirst is something we all share. Yes. So I feel like there's also a little bit of a lesson that can be taken there, or insights that the characters are making with one another, and they can relate to the text very well. With I feel like that one in particular, if you want to stretch it, could be very indicative of what the whirlwind itself was and what the Malazan army at this point in the book is. They are thirsting for blood. That is something they thirst for at this point. And I feel like using an indirect way of paralleling that being, oh, Karul's blood is the Warrens. He had a thirst for creating magic. Just as now at this point in the book, I'm assuming if you're watching still, you've read The Bone Hunters, the Malazans definitely have a thirst for blood, for the rebellion. They still have not gotten Coltane's justice by chapter 4. So, or the justice for everything that's gone on Seven Cities. So I just feel like that is one big thing about these is the parallels that can be drawn to the text, and they can highlight certain things about the text even more before chapters and before regarding the entire book, as well as adding that world building. Next, also in the Bone Hunters, 2 chapters later, the epigraph for 3 chapters later, the epigraph for chapter 7, which is the Siege of Yucatan. So, a very long chapter, a very heated chapter. And it has a very, very small epigraph. It just reads, "Never bargain with a man who has nothing to lose. Sayings of the fool. Thenis Buell is the writer." And that one in particular, I feel, is a little bit of that foreshadowing, but it really highlights what happens in that chapter, as many of the epigraphs do. Sayings of the Fool, first off, being the title of where that comes from, could indicate that whoever the man who's being bargained with has nothing to lose. I would assume it's sayings of the fool because the fool is a man who learned this saying the hard way. Just as the rebellion learned not to trust, or just as Cora Bilan Thanu Alas learned that Leomin is a man with nothing to lose at this point, because the rebellion is as nothing to him at this point. Obviously, the siege of Yucatan, he baits the Malazans into this siege just to kill them all and to blow up the rebellion. And Corabilantanu Alas, in particular, basically says that he is a scoundrel, he's a fiend, he's a slithering worm, snake at this point, that he did this to the rebellion. And that particular epigraph, highlighting that even more to me, is just one of the reasons why the epigraphs are worth reading, because drawing that parallel with that particular quote is just interesting, and the way that it relates to the texts can sort of maybe influence you on how you view certain aspects of the text. Sayings of the fool, never bargain with a man who has nothing to lose. That could also potentially be foreshadowing. I won't say if it is or isn't, not that I even know if I do know or not. That could also be foreshadowing for Leoman, because Leoman makes a bargain with the Queen of Dreams in order to escape. We don't know if the Queen of Dreams has anything to lose. We don't know what her purposes are at this point in the book. So it could also draw attention to that deal he makes to get out with Captain Dunsparrow of Yucatan. So there is all of that. And I think that that is very interesting in terms of the text. And I feel like it's part of the reason why it is so worthwhile to read, because it really gives you a lot to think about. I mean, if I hadn't reread this, I didn't even draw that parallel when I originally read it. That could be foreshadowing for all that, and it just makes a more complete, not maybe complete tale, but it can give you a more complete thought process for how you view everything that's happening and how you understand the events there. So those are the two from the Bone Hunters that I chose. Um, Next, I have a singular one from Reaper's Gale, and I have made a video on this, or not a video, I made a post about this to the Malazan subreddit. And it is the epigraph of the epilogue of Midnight Tides. And it has no name, but it is a poem written by Fisher Keltath that reads, "And it is this moment, my friends, when you must look away, as the world unfurls anew, in shapes announced both bright and sordid, in dark and light, and the sprawl of all existence that lies between." Now, this is where I'll highlight something that is particularly prevalent to the poems, I believe, and that is the literary analysis aspect that can be taken with them. Because when I read that poem originally, I didn't think about it too much. But I decided to go back and read some of the epigraphs from this book because I wanted to see if there was something I missed or if there was something that I thought could be interesting to think about a little more. And that was one that jumped out at me in particular. And because it is a somber reflection of what happened in this book, it is a time to turn away, and it is a time to reflect on shapes both dark and light and bright and sordid. I won't get into a whole analysis of that because of the post I made, and that's not what this video is about. It's about why you should read the epigraph. And I believe that reading this also gives you a more whole look at the book in general, this one in particular, being the final epigraph of this book. Um, um, and the fact that it draws attention to everything that happened and how you view it, or how the characters in the book can view it, especially regarding the epilogue of this book, which, as you know, is the maker of the sword finally getting off of the crippled gods island with Sandalath Drew Corlat by praying to Male. And then Male ends it with saying, there's a god that I have to beat senseless in his tent right now. Which, besides just being a great ending for this book, joined with the epigraph, I feel kind of encapsulates the tone of this book, as well as being that somber reflection that we can have after reading this text. I mean, this is I think I've heard it described by in an interview or on a post. Someone said that Stephen Erickson described this book as a tragedy written in the style of a fantasy instead of a tragedy within a fantasy. It is a tragedy with fantastic elements, not a fantasy with tragic elements. And I feel like that's definitely pertinent to how you're supposed to view the text. And I feel like this epigraph poem really draws attention to that way of viewing the text. And I feel like analyzing these particular epigraphs, and maybe all of them in general, gives you that more whole understanding of both the author's way of viewing the text and the characters and whatnot. And what is reading if not trying to understand what the author is saying and trying to understand what the characters are thinking? I know that reading is also for entertainment purposes, and that is completely why I read. And I am entertained by doing these analyses and thinking more heavily upon the text. And I know that that's not everybody's cup of tea, but in Malazan, I feel like that is particularly pertinent. And for that reason, I think that that's another reason why the epigraphs are so worthwhile in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I feel like that one highlighted it very well. Finally, I have two, I believe, selected in House of Chains. One of them, let me check here. I believe one of them is, yes. So this is the beginning to there's two epigraphs here. One of them is the epigraph for a part of the book and the other is for the chapter. So they're read one after another. And it is part two or book two of House of Chains, Cold Iron. Which, if you know what which is since you've read House of Chains, I'm guessing, um, you would know what Cold Iron means. So obviously, it's talking about a style of commanding an army. There is hot iron, and then there is cold iron, such as Coltane and um, Tavor in this book, which they find out. But the beginning to this part of the book is a small section of a poem, or it's part of a collection of poems, and not each individual poem has a name, but the collection is called Call to Shadow, written by Philison or Shaik Younger. And this poem in particular goes, it's really short. There are folds in this shadow, hiding entire worlds. Now, I paused there for a reason because after it says there are folds in the shadow, it goes dot 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 and then goes to the next line and says hiding entire worlds. Now to Call to Shadow. Listen. Now, aside from the myriad nuances of Shadow in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, as well as the characters related to it, such as Shadowthrone, Amanas, Kellenved, Dancer, Cotillion, The Rope, Shadowthrone, whatever name you want to give them these days. Besides just that, I feel like it is very encapsulating of what the Malazan Book of the Fallen is in general. Besides being a very literal statement, there are folds in the shadow hiding entire worlds. There are folds, there are literally entire worlds in the Malazan Book of the Fallen within the Warrens. I mean, besides just that immediate connection you can draw, um, I feel like it is supposed to make the reader think more about everything that is happening. Every interaction, every conversation, every piece of text is not written without purpose in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, at least in my opinion. Sometimes it's written for the epicness, sometimes it's written for the more introspective look into the characters and for the themes in general. But I feel like that is, besides being a call to shadow, is a call to the reader to more closely look at everything in the text. There are folds in every shadow and nook and cranny, hiding entire worlds, hiding entire thoughts, hiding entire um, thoughts that you can have in general. I know I said thoughts twice, but entire thought processes that can be done for everything. At least that's what I got out of this. I feel as if I would need to reread House of Chains to more aptly draw a connection between that and the particular part that it comes before, but that's what I got from it. And I feel like it's also indicative of the character herself. Um, Felicin Paran, besides having her love of poetry that we know of, is very tortured, I'd say. She's a very sad character in this book. And her call to Shadow being this sort of constantly moving, amorphous, immaterial force in the world. I mean, since I've already talked about the Bone Hunters, all the way in the Bone Hunters, we find out that we already know by this book that the Warren of Shadow, Corald Emerlon, is destroyed. It has been shattered into multiple pieces, and the Whirlwind is one such piece, manifested on their world. But aside from this, you have to think that Shadow itself is change. I've seen people argue that before. I don't have quite as nuanced an opinion on that or things to say, but I feel like it gives you a closer look into the mind of Felicin Paran, which is a big reason you should read the epigraphs because it can give you a it can let you peer deeper into what characters are thinking and feeling. And I feel like if you're reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen, that is something that is invaluable. And it's invaluable for one of the biggest themes of the series, and that is compassion. Uh, the compassion to look deeper into these characters and to truly understand them. And that is one reason. And then beyond that, there is something which I feel encapsulates the themes of the Malazan Book of the Fallen better than anything. And it is right after that, in the chapter that comes right after that epigraph, chapter 5 of House of Chains. It reads, Woe to the fallen in the alleys of Erin. Anonymous. And I believe that encapsulates the themes quite well because you need to have the sympathy and the compassion to have the woe for the fallen in the alleys of Erin. And what is this? It is the book of the fallen, those who fall to the wayside and those who die and fall in battle and fall in life. And I feel like it brings those themes round quite well. And the fact that it's anonymous as well, I feel is very indicative of another character, and that is Itkovian, the shield anvil in the previous book, Memories of Ice. And a quote that he says, and I might be misquoting a little bit because I don't remember it exactly, but he, I believe, says something like, compassion must be given freely and in abundance. And I feel like this being anonymous really uh, brings to the forefront that idea of it needs to be given freely. We don't know who wrote this, and it's not important. It could be anybody, but everyone should feel woe for the fallen in the alleys of Erin. As well as drawing parallels between the text of the Chain of Dogs, Erin is where it all ended, and even though um, the people that High Fist Pormqual took out of Erin didn't die in Erin, you could draw that parallel. As well as this book with its themes of civilizations, the idea of people, with Carson Orlong in particular, the themes of people dying in a city, as well as, in future books with Carson Orlong as well, the idea of people dying in an alley and having woe for them. As we come to find out, Carson Orlong despises civilization. He does not like sprawling cities. He doesn't like what seethes in them. He doesn't like what they breed. They breed torture, and they breed um, just terrible things. And Carson Orlong only sees the worst of it, I would say. Uh, Maybe my opinion is not as nuanced as I've done the series, but um, I feel like that's another reason you should read the epigraphs of uh, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And then beyond that, there's also other such quotes that can draw direct parallels to the text. Um, I believe there is, as I said before, the coming storm by Refer directly foreshadows everything that's happening in the end of Reaper's Gale. And I believe it is the poem that also gives Reaper's Gale its ending. This dread, this blood, this Reaper's Gale. And it uses such words as to elicit uh, certain scenes that appear after that poem. It's also very indicative. It's also very, not indicative, sorry. It's very fitting where it appears because it appears at the chapter where the coming storm is really at the forefront, where everything is sort of starting to reach a head. The climax is really starting to ramp up. It's only at chapter 15, I believe, and there's still a good quarter chunk of the book left, but that is where the climax really starts to happen. So, those are just some of my reasons why I believe you should read the epigraphs in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and that's a little bit of my defense of them. So I hope that maybe you got a little bit out of this and you enjoyed some of my points, or maybe it convinces you to read the epigraphs with a closer eye. I know that I am not the most learned man. My literary analysis is not perfect, it is not great even. This is just me trying to piece together what I can about a series I really enjoy and making my arguments for certain things that I've seen. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have a good day. Goodbye.